Silent Hill 2 Remake is a scary adventure game where you go back to a foggy town to find someone you lost and things get really weird. Now, personally, I love horror games, although this might not be for everyone. The town looks amazing, it's super detailed, and the monsters are really creepy. They made the old game look new, and that's cool, but sometimes you just walk around a lot looking for clues and it can feel a little slow, like you're just wandering. But then Pyramid Head shows up and everything gets intense. The story is still really good, and it makes you think about what's really happening. Some parts are super scary, some parts are just sad, and it's all very emotional. If you play the original game, you'll probably like this. It's a good remake, and it keeps you guessing until the end, and that's what a good scary game should do. Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 is seriously intense. I mean, seriously, this game is not for the faint of heart. The story is gripping, and the way it tackles mental health is really something else.
What have you done? Stop.
Please help!
You're right there with Senua, battling her inner demons, and the voices in her head are so realistic, it's actually kind of unsettling. The combat is brutal too, and you really have to be strategic to survive. I found myself holding my breath during some of the bigger fights, but what really blew me away were the visuals. The environments are stunning, and the way they blend reality with Senua's perceptions is just incredible. I found myself stopping to admire the scenery all the time, which I don't usually do in games. Honestly, Hellblade 2 is more than just a game, it's an experience. It's definitely challenging and emotionally draining, but it's also incredibly rewarding. If you're looking for something different and thought-provoking, then this is the game for you. I haven't actually played this game myself, but my friend can't stop talking about it. It's called Pentiment, and apparently it's this really cool murder mystery set in the 16th century. You play as this artist who gets tangled up in this whole murder investigation and has to find the real killer, and the whole time it's like you're living in this medieval painting with all the characters and the music and everything. The story is super interesting with lots of twists and turns, and you get to make all sorts of choices that actually affect what happens and can even lead to different endings. It's a pretty slow-paced game, though, and there's a lot of reading and talking to people, so if you're looking for something with lots of action, it might not be for you. But if you like history or mysteries or just unique games in general, you should definitely check it out. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is seriously one of the most beautiful games I've ever played, and I'm not exaggerating when I say I've finished it 3 times already. Everything about it is just stunning, from the hand-painted art style to the incredible soundtrack, and the story is so emotional and captivating that I was hooked from beginning to end. You play as this little spirit named Ori, and you have to explore this huge world and solve all sorts of puzzles and fight enemies to save the forest. The movement and combat are so fluid and satisfying, and there are tons of abilities and upgrades to unlock, so it never gets boring. Honestly, the only bad thing I can say about this game is that it can be pretty challenging at times, and I definitely died a lot, but it was always worth it to see what was around the next corner. If you're looking for a game with a beautiful world, a touching story, and amazing gameplay, then you absolutely need to check out Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Little Nightmares 2 is a game that gave me the creeps in the best way possible. It's a puzzle platformer where you play as this little kid named Mono, and you're exploring this really creepy and distorted world with your friend Six. The atmosphere is seriously intense with all these unsettling environments and disturbing characters, and the sound design is amazing. It just adds to the whole creepy vibe. The puzzles are really clever too, and they make you think outside the box, and the platforming is challenging, but not too frustrating. I loved the first Little Nightmares game, and this one definitely lived up to the hype. And I can't wait to see what they do with the next installment in the series, which is supposed to be out sometime in 2025.
The place is coming down!
Okay.
Okay, so I finally got my hands on Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and wow, this game is a wild ride from start to finish. You get to explore all these amazing locations like ancient temples and hidden cities, and the puzzles are really clever. I spent hours trying to figure some of them out. The story is super exciting too, with plenty of twists and turns that kept me guessing the whole time, plus the graphics are incredible. It actually feels like you're in a classic Indiana Jones movie. The combat can be a little clunky at times though, and I wish there were more enemy variety because after a while it starts to feel a bit repetitive.
Should have left this alone.
Yeah? Well, I should have done a lot of things.
But honestly, those are just minor nitpicks in an otherwise awesome game. If you're a fan of Indiana Jones or just love a good action adventure, then you definitely need to check this one out. Okay, so I jumped into Dragon's Dogma 2, and at first I was like, whoa, this is a little rough around the edges, because some things were glitchy and it felt kind of clunky. But you know what? They've been putting out a bunch of patches, and the more I played, the more I got hooked. Seriously, the combat is just so satisfying, especially when you're like climbing up a giant cyclops and stabbing it right in the eye. Plus, the world is huge, and there's always something cool to discover around every corner. And can we talk about the pawns? I love those little guys. They're always there to back you up in a fight, and they actually learn and get stronger as you play, which is really awesome. I will say that some of the quests can get a little repetitive, and the menus are kind of confusing, but honestly, that didn't bother me too much. If you're into action RPGs with a huge world and tons of freedom, you should definitely check out Dragon's Dogma 2. Okay, so I jumped into Death Stranding, and honestly, at first I was like, what am I even doing? You're basically this delivery guy just walking around this crazy landscape carrying tons of stuff and trying not to fall over, which is way harder than it sounds. There are these weird invisible monsters that try to grab you, and you have to hold your breath to avoid them, which is kind of creepy. I will say the story is pretty wild and the world is really interesting to explore, but it definitely gets a bit repetitive. I mean, some might call this game a walking simulator, which it probably is, and it might not be for everyone, as a lot of people might find it boring. But there's something about it that just kept me going, like I had to see what was next and where this crazy story was going. Plus, the graphics are insane and the soundtrack is amazing, so that definitely helped keep me hooked.
Opa, bora lá.
Black Myth Wukong is a visual masterpiece with next-level graphics and environments so detailed and atmospheric that I felt like I was exploring a living painting. And the combat is just as impressive because it's fast-paced and challenging, with a deep moveset that lets you unleash some seriously cool combos and transformations to outsmart your enemies. I especially loved experimenting with all the different ways to fight and figuring out which abilities worked best against different enemies. While the story could have been a bit more engaging and some of the boss fights were definitely tough as nails, those are honestly minor complaints in an otherwise incredible game that any fan of action RPGs or anyone who appreciates stunning visuals and challenging gameplay should definitely check out. Okay, so Baldur's Gate 3, this is probably my most played game on this list, and I think it's actually one of the best games of the last 5 years. The story just pulls you in and doesn't let go with these amazing characters you meet along the way, and the world is massive and so much fun to explore. You can wander around for hours and hours and still find something new, and the open world is packed with secrets and surprises. It's got that classic Dungeons and Dragons feel, but with really cool modern graphics. And the combat is turn-based, which I know can be a turn-off for some people, but honestly, it just works perfectly and gives you time to really think about your moves. I just love how much freedom you have in this game to create your own character and story.